Today we're going to discuss the integrating quotations assignment. This is one that has often caused confusion for students, so I want to be sure that you understand what I expect. This assignment is located in the Unit 1 narrative folder. After the information on what you need to read, and after the information on the plagiarism, you will see integrating quotations. When you click on the link, it pulls up a PDF document. This document explains certain things about using quotations in your writing and how you will use them with citations when you are doing things correctly in MLA style. When you get to the portion of this where you will practice, you'll need to write it on a separate Word document and submit it in Blackboard. There are 3 basic rules to follow when you choose a quote. Use quotations when the author's words are more memorable and will make your paper more interesting. When the author's words say something just better than you can say it, or when you want to add authority to your paper. Basically, you're providing proof of what you are saying is true. Once you've selected the passage that you want to quote, you have to work the material into your paper naturally. Don't use phrases like, "this quote says," or "the author stated that." Work it in, make it flow as if it's all one thought. Gene acknowledged his fear when he said it was a night made for hard thoughts. It was a night made for hard thoughts, asserted Gene in a moment of clarity. Not just Gene said. Why is that quote there? Give some information to help solidify it and help integrate it. Why is it important? What does it say that you can't say? Think about these things before you just throw a quote in willy-nilly. I apologize for my dogs in the background. I've tried to re-record this about 4 times now. Please ignore them. When using a quote, you also only use ellipses, the 3 dots, when you take something out of the middle. You don't use it at the beginning of a passage, and you don't use it at the end of a passage, only in the middle. An ellipses is only 3 periods. Do not put period, 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 period. That doesn't work and it's unnecessary. For example, in the original text, the quote may have said, "Bombs in Central Europe were completely unreal to us here in Liverpool because our place here was far too fair for us to accept something like that." But you don't need the "in Liverpool," it's just extra words, or there may have been much more there. So when you take out a piece in the middle of your quote, you use ellipses to indicate there was something there that you took away. If you begin your quotation in the middle of a sentence, you do not need to indicate deleted words with an ellipsis. You just start the quote at the part you're quoting. The rest of it, it's like it wasn't even there. Proclaiming the friendship wonderful, productive, and everlasting, Gene was confident it would continue. Now, a word of caution here. Wonderful, productive, and everlasting are very common words, and normally wouldn't really require you to quote them. However, in this case, because of what it's adding to the story, and because it's a particular order of the words, you do want to use that as a quote. If you're saying something like all-inclusive vacation, you wouldn't quote that. It's too common. It's said that way everywhere that it's said. Short little pieces like that do not make up a quote. At the same time, remember to keep your quotes short. Your quotes do not need to be incredibly long in order to be in your paper. 4 or 5 words is a good goal for a minimum, and 40 to 45 is a good goal for a maximum for the length of paper that we'll be writing. If your quote goes over 4 lines, you need to parse it down, find just the most important part, and only use that part. Don't use overly long quotes in our short papers that we write in this class. More on that with each individual paper instruction. Let's see here. In most cases, a quotation or paraphrase is immediately followed by the author's last name and page number in parentheses. The period goes after the closing parenthesis. For example, Jen 65. The author's last name is Jen. The quote was found on page 65, period. Some quick tips. Do not indicate the page number in your sentence. In your actual text, don't say, "On page 24, the narrator says." Don't give a vague or broad location either. In Chapter 3, this quote says. Don't place a period at the end of the quote itself. It was a new beginning, period. The citation that you put is technically part of the sentence, so this period does not belong here. Do add some analysis or meaning. Gene demonstrates his frustration with society when he points out that bombs are the least effective way to solve problems. Do include a parenthetical, which means in parentheses, citation for every sentence that contains a quote. If you include the author's name in the sentence, only put the page number at the end. King points out that it was, quote, a night made for hard thoughts, end quote, 93. You said King in the sentence, so you don't need his name in the citation at the end. If you don't include the author's name in the sentence, then you have to put it in parentheses so we know where you got that information. He pointed out that it was a night made for hard thoughts. King, 93. In order for a quote to be properly integrated, it must flow smoothly from your words to the words you quote and back again, as if it's all one complete thought, as if you wrote all of the words yourself. It should make sense as one and only one sentence. It should not be something that could be a complete and full sentence on its own and then a quote that you just decided all went together because you put a comma there. It needs to make sense. So for the practice, this is what you're going to do. You're going to practice integrating quotations using three basic methods. One where you begin with your own words, one where you begin with the quote, and one where you put the quote in the middle. So for example, you are given the text, when her children were present, she always felt the center of her heart go hard. She was cold and mean, but the community thought her grand. This quote comes from page 120 of The Rocking Horse Winter, a book by D.H. Lawrence. So if you were going to begin with your own words to introduce the quote and end with the quote, you might say something like, even though Paul's mother seems loving at first, when her children were present, she always felt the center of her heart go hard. Note that this all makes sense as one complete sentence, but you have the quotation mark with no space and then the words that begin the quote. At the end, you have the last word and then the quotation mark with no space, but you do have a space in between the quotation mark and the opening parenthesis. Then you have the parenthetical citation, which is the author's last name, space, and the page number. The period is at the end. If you were going to begin with a quote and end it with your own words, you would say, perhaps, she always felt the center of her heart go hard is just one example of how the author shows the contradiction in what Paul's mother shows the world and how she really feels about her children. Again, it's all integrated, it's all one thought, and the citation comes at the end of the sentence, not at the end of the quote. You can also put the quote in the middle with your own words on each end. Paul's mother always felt the center of her heart go hard while spending time with her children, but to the rest of the world, she appears to be a loving mother. Now, here's some tips on this, and this is part of what I've had confusion with in the past on this assignment. First and foremost, you do not have to use the entire text that I gave you as the quote. Take a piece of it, just from somewhere in the middle, or from the beginning, or from the end, to use as your quote. You're going to pretend that this is part of a larger paper, but not all three sentences are in the same paper. You can use when her children were present as your quote in one of these, and you can use the community thought her grand in another one. It doesn't have to be the same piece of the original quote. The sentences that you write don't have to be related to each other, but they do need to make sense with what you're quoting as if you were using this in a paper. The quote used in the example sentences is only a portion of the given quote. It is not necessary to include the entire quote in these exercises. You may use any portion of the original text, and you do not have to use the same portion for all three sentences. Please ask if you have questions. So many people think they know what they're doing and get this wrong when all they had to do was ask a simple question to make sure to get it right. Now, as we move forward, you will see you are given two different sets of text and a total of 6 sentences to write. In the first set, if you'd seen Tucker's initial performance appraisals, you might have concluded that, despite her stated open door policy, she was one of those insensitive managers who never listened to their subordinates. Please be very careful that when you are quoting, you do not change anything in the original quote. Every semester, I have someone who tells me that she is an intensive manager, not insensitive, or people who assume something about her initial performance appraisals. I also have had several cases where a student goes and looks for this book and finds some other information on this page that they include in their quote. That is way too much work. Don't do that. There's no reason for it. Use this information. You can make up anything else. Your paper that you are hypothetically writing could be about Tucker's performance appraisals. It could be about management styles. It could be about open door policies. And by the way, the words open door policy are not quotable by themselves. That is not a quote. Open door policy is a standard phrase that is used all over the world all the time. Please do not turn that in as your piece that is quoted. Note that the book is by Dan Heath. It's on page 194. And interestingly, I've given you the name of the book, but do you need that for your citation? Sometimes extra pieces of information can trip you up. Don't get fooled. Just write 3 sentences. Every single one of these 3 sentences should either end with a parentheses Heath 194 or parentheses 194, close parentheses and period at the end. The second one, and this is one that really has confused a lot of people with the meaning of the original quote, so make sure you pay attention. Many young people today have rediscovered an inexpensive form of entertainment their grandmothers may have also enjoyed. Online sites such as Pinterest and craft forums have revived the interest in exploring yarn crafts such as crochet and knitting, scrapbooking, jewelry making, and the creation of other handmade items. Please note the meaning here. They're saying that young people now have rediscovered inexpensive entertainment like yarn crafts, like scrapbooking, like jewelry making, and like hand making items. And these are things that their grandmothers might have also enjoyed. You have to keep the tenses the same as they are when you're quoting. Make sure you understand that. So once again, you will begin with your own words with a piece of this somewhere out of it. You will begin with the quote, and then you will have your quote in the middle. Once again, please ask if you don't understand, but that's the basic expectation, is just write me 6 sentences. You can do it. I know you can.